Hey everyone, and welcome here. 2 weeks ago I posted a video on emotional immaturity in adults, and I shared some tools and strategies that we can apply when we are interacting with someone who's emotionally immature so that this interaction and relationship is less draining and hurtful. And I got a lot of responses from all of you saying that this is something you encountered before and encounter even regularly, and that it was helpful to reflect about that. And I also posted something short about this on Facebook, and in one of the groups a few people raised concerns that speaking about emotional immaturity in adults is offensive, judgmental, unhealthy, and unhelpful. And I wanted to address this. When we look at the history of this concept, it's nothing new. So philosophers and psychologists have been discussing personal growth that continues throughout adulthood for ages. Some of their names are Piaget, Kohlberg, Loevinger, Cook-Reuter, Keegan, Lindsay Gibson, Thomas Binder, Svenja Hofert. And their ideas have always been met with discomfort from some people. The idea that growth and development continues past youth and may even take the form of stages that we pass through is somehow something that elicits discomfort in some people. We can easily accept that there are stages of maturity in kids and teenagers, but applying that thought onto adults isn't something that everyone finds as helpful. Where is that discomfort coming from? I think partly it comes from equating emotional maturity with worth, to misunderstand that these concepts are somehow saying that someone who is more personally developed or more emotionally mature is worthier and has more potential as a human being. But that is not at all the intention of these concepts. What these concepts offer is guidance. They can show us where we are and what our next steps can be, so we can learn to solve our problems more effectively. And if we're honest with ourselves and willing to self-reflect, then these concepts can only help us to live a more fulfilled life. Part of the discomfort with these concepts may also be coming from suspecting a sense of superiority in the philosophers and psychologists that work with these concepts, to think that, because they came up with this concept and formulated a theory about this, they now assume that they are on the highest level of emotional maturity or personal growth, and now they're looking down on everyone. And sure, some people who use words like personal growth may do that to make themselves feel better, but it's actually a sign of emotional immaturity to try to put others down to feel better for oneself. And someone with true emotional maturity wouldn't do that. They'd be interested in supporting others on their way if they're interested. And all of the psychologists and philosophers that I've come in contact with who are very invested into these models of stages of personal growth are very kind and, in a positive sense, humble people. Another reason these concepts could be perceived as threatening is if we look at them from the perspective of a fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is the belief that humans don't really change throughout life, that they're pretty much born the way they are. And a growth mindset is the mindset that is aware of our potential to change and grow and learn throughout our whole life. We are much more like dough that can be shaped rather than statues that are born one way and then just have to stay that way their whole life. And if we're aware of that, then concepts and ideas coming from these concepts that deal with emotional maturity and emotional immaturity don't have to be threatening at all. Sure, it's threatening if I think that I can never develop these skills that are being talked about, and that these perspectives and mindset shifts and emotional and mental strategies are just out of my reach or out of someone's reach, and that it's kind of like a judgment to say that someone is emotionally immature. But luckily that's not true. The brain is constantly forming new cells, and we are a lot more able to change, learn, and grow than humanity has believed. And in that way, seen under that light, it doesn't have to be threatening to think about one's own emotional maturity and immaturity, because we can look at it from the viewpoint of being curious to find out where we are and what we could learn to have a life that's more fulfilled and to be able to contribute in more effective ways and be happy. Emotional maturity doesn't have to be threatening if we're not identified with who we are right now in a way that sees ourselves as always having to be this way. And Lindsay Gibson's emotional maturity awareness approach isn't about trying to get everyone to like us, and then if they don't approve of us, we immediately judge them as being emotionally immature. It's not possible and unnecessary to try and get everyone to like us. But it does happen that people who are emotionally immature approach others with certain expectations that are unfair to the other person. Emotionally immature people haven't learned to regulate their emotions on their own, and they try to do it with the help of other people. And one way they do that is by expecting others to do what they want them to do. And that can be very, very draining and a big burden in someone's life. And just being able to look the truth in the eye and see that this expectation that this person is putting on me to be in charge of how they're feeling all of the time and to just do everything they want so that they're not unhappy, this expectation is unfair and unrealistic, and it's suffocating me as a person, and I don't have to comply to their expectation because it's coming from an immature place. And that can be very liberating when we realize that. And it's not about going up to someone and calling them emotionally immature. It's just about recognizing it for ourselves so that we can change the expectations we bring into such relationships, and so that we can adapt the way we enter these interactions, so that we can enter them in a way that is observant, detached from trying to get approval and some deep sense of emotional connection, and also to enter the interaction being very conscious of setting boundaries and taking charge to make sure that the interaction doesn't get out of hand, because that's also something that emotionally immature people will do, that they will just take charge and take over, take someone else into their own energy so much that there's no space for the other person. And if we are aware of that, we can enter the interaction and make sure that that doesn't happen. And someone may also say, well, if someone's not reacting in a way that is emotionally connecting, why not just walk away from that person? Some people are just not our cup of tea. that doesn't have to mean that they're emotionally immature. And I completely agree with that. But sometimes there are people in our life, either because they're family or because we work with them, or just for some reason we are connected to them, and we can't or don't want to just cut off that relationship. And for those cases, it's important to know how to enter those relationships so that they're less hurtful. But that doesn't, of course, mean that every time we can't connect with someone, that means that the other person is emotionally immature. Of course, there's always two people coming into an interaction, and of course, sometimes one's just not on another person's wavelength. This approach is meant for relationships that can't be cut off, or we don't want to cut off, but are emotionally dissatisfying, hurtful. When something is off in the relationship, although the other person may be claiming that they love us very deeply, but their behavior doesn't show that at all. That's what these tools are meant for. And of course, these tools can be misapplied, like any good idea can be misapplied for manipulative or egocentric purposes. But that's not the problem of the tool, that's the difficulty of the intention. So just because something can be misused doesn't mean it can't be helpful if it's used from a place of just honest intention and integrity. The maturity awareness approach is also not about being judgmental of people who are emotionally immature. Everyone has their own story and their past, and emotional immaturity is something that is also given on throughout generations. Just like emotional maturity is something that parents teach their children. So that's not at all the intention here, to be judgmental of someone who just hasn't had the opportunity or hasn't taken the opportunity to learn something. Everyone has the potential to be emotionally mature. Everyone. And that it doesn't say anything about someone's worth or capability or potential to see that right now this person is in a state of acting emotionally immature. Actually, I also prefer to use the word modes rather than stages when talking about personal growth, because I feel stage has such a permanent sound to it. Like if you're on this and this stage of personal growth, as if we couldn't all regress and fall back into old patterns. Sometimes we learn something new, but we haven't learned how to apply it in another situation. There are so many reasons why we can act emotionally mature or immature. So I prefer to use that term modes to see what mode am I in currently, rather than saying that I'm on a stage and feeling superior about it and feeling like I can't ever fall down from the stage because I read this book and now I'm so evolved. That would be quite unreflected. Some people also suggested maybe to use a different term, not to use the term immaturity, because it's quite intense. I like that term, to be honest, because it's very clear. And part of the challenge for people who are in a relationship that has an emotionally immature dynamic is to extricate themselves from that. It's like they're wrapped up in the net of the emotionally immature person, and that person is kind of holding them captive emotionally and just using them. And a big part of freeing themselves from that net for people is to recognize what's going on. And sometimes these very clear terms are just what people need to gather the courage to change something in their life and the way they're interacting with someone. If we use terms that are very soft, it can sometimes lead to missing the point and kind of walking by the issue. And that would be really just sad for the people who are suffering in these kinds of relationship dynamics and who need to get out of them. So hearing that there is such a thing as emotional immaturity in adults, and that you don't have to expose yourself to it, is very, very empowering for some situations and some people. And that's why I really like the term and will continue to use it. I hope this clarifies some of the questions and concerns that were raised. Please feel free to discuss also more in the comments. And till next time, take good care of yourself, and remember that growth happens throughout our whole life, and maturity is not something that is reached by a physical age, but something we reach through lifelong learning. And that if you are in a relationship with someone who is emotionally immature, you don't have to expose yourself to that. You're allowed to live your life according to your values and to set boundaries where they are.